Ladies and gentlemen, let's get ready for the Wot Supp podcast. With your host, Stu OG Industry Shannon and Will Warren Davey, new school formulator extraordinaire. We're talking all things supplements with insiders, athletes, experts, and more. So sit back, relax, and prepare to find out what's up.
Okay, welcome to episode 11 of the Wot Supp podcast. Today we have the legendary Stu, Shannon in the seat, as always, our faithful co-host, and of course, none other than Joseph Mencel himself, CEO of Massive Joe's, IFBB Pro, joining us to give us a rundown in all things around supplementation, business, competing, being an athlete, being basically the guy in the driver's seat of a pretty massive operation that's been going for probably a decade here in Australia. So without further ado, Joe, I'd like to say howdy, mate, and give us a bit of a background for any of our listeners. I mean, they're probably not going to not know who you are, but possibly just to give them a little bit of background on what your general day looks like and what you tend to operate at the moment, mate.
Sure. Hey, Will. Hey, Stu. What's happening? Thank you guys first and foremost for inviting me onto the show. I'm excited to spend the next hour or so with you guys and, talk all things supp and industry and bodybuilding and, all of the things that I'm super passionate about. So, it's going to be a good time. I guess, you've kind of listed a bunch of the, headline things that I do. I own a supplement company called Massive Joe's. That company does a bunch of different things in the industry. We run MassiveJoes.com, which is the online retail side of the business. We run 10 bricks and mortar retail stores. We run the distribution side of Massive Joe's, which is Massive Joe's with distribution. We run, the media part of the company as well, which is responsible for, everything that we do content-wise, whether it's the Massive Joe's Challenge, whether it's the Massive Joe's YouTube channel, all of your typical socials, Facebook, Instagram, Snapchat, all that kind of jazz, and all of the creative content that goes into that. Then I also own an apparel company called TMJ Apparel. TMJ stands for Team Massive Joe's. We don't call it that anymore, but that kind of, demonstrates the roots of where that kind of began was, an apparel merchandise company for Massive Joe's and particularly for the Massive Joe's sponsored athletes at the time. And that's kind of merged into its own brand and its own company now called TMJ Apparel. And then I guess outside of that, but still within the industry, I compete myself. I'm an IFBB Pro men's physique athlete. I'm also an IFBB Pro League promoter. So I run the IFBB Pro League here in South Australia, which is where I'm based and where my companies are based. So we run the season A shows, the season B shows. I'm a partner with Tony Doherty here in South Australia running those as well. I think that's probably,
that's probably enough of a rap list, really.
If you want the 2-minute rundown, that's it. So
I should have probably said, what haven't you done? Which would probably say it'd be a shorter list. But that's one thing that I think you touched on there that I think has probably been a big game changer, though. I wanted to focus on, and it flows in the business angle, the content that you guys have produced started a bit of a trend that hasn't sort of been matched since. And it was things like, I remember when we've met in podcast in expos previously at Arnold's and such, talking of Tony, and you've spoken about how you guys got on the YouTube bandwagon quite a long time ago. And I think anyone who's going to listen to this would have listened to a raw review, over the last 10 years or so and seen, and they go right back to the OG products.
They do. Don't remind me.
I had one pod the other day. I think it was of like Super Pump 250 and it looked about 16. So it was awesome.
Yeah. What year did you actually start the whole Massive Joe's thing, Joe? It's like I've been in the industry since 2009, so I was around right at the start of Aussie Supp's era, which I'm sure you'll remember quite well, and got involved. I was kind of the right hand man for the devil himself for a while there. Okay. But what year was it when you kind of got started?
2005. Was the original seeds were planted, so to speak. And, very, very grassroots. Like I'm talking, so I was 2005, I was 19 years old when I started the company. And I started pretty much, I kind of, it was just right place at right time. And it came from my passion for bodybuilding. So back when I was younger, I used to play a lot of basketball. That was kind of my, athletic endeavor when I was, a kid and a teenager, and developed some injuries that, kind of ended anything I was going to do with basketball. Then I got into bodybuilding, and I guess the interest in supplements that then developed into a passion for supplements kind of came from my personal athletic experience competing as a natural bodybuilder. So when I first started Massive Joe's, it was November 2005. I was literally, this is literally how the company started. You'll see what I mean when I say grassroots. I was literally importing supplements from the US, in particular BSN. You'll probably remember this, Stu, like the original BSN NO Explode, red tubs,
yes,
yellow lid.
yes.
Well, you remember as well.
Oh man, I use so many tubs
with like the yellow and the red and the blue and the man,
and the sodium bicarbonate. It tasted like fizzy Gatorade.
But like those were the subs that I was using for myself. And so I was competing at the time, in junior divisions, whatever, back in INBA days. And I was training, I was at university at the time studying as well. And I was training at the university gym, and, the guys used to call me Massive Joe, right? Because back then no one was bodybuilding. So if you were bodybuilding, it was like a big deal. Now it's like everyone goes to the gym, competes. But back then it wasn't like that. So I was importing these supplements, and I Explode, Cell Mass, Nitrix, Synthesix, or, all the original BSN, Volumaze, Cheetah's Relief, like Thermonix, the original BSN stuff, importing for myself. And so the guys that were training at the uni gym, would see me, drink this pre-workout stuff before I'd train, and have the Volumaze intra-workout when everyone else was just drinking water. And then, I started doing well in bodybuilding. So they started asking me, can you get me some of that stuff that you're importing? So I literally started importing my personal supplements from the US, then started importing more stuff and was selling it to guys at the university gym. That's legit where it started.
So Massive Joe's was your nickname, and Massive Joe's, what now is massivejoes.com, was literally the back of your car.
Yes.
Back of a university gym in Adelaide.
That's great. It's great. It's really, really cool to hear that stuff, because I think a lot of the young people trying to do something with themselves, whether it's in supplements or anything else, they kind of feel like there's no way I can get from here to somewhere, somewhere up there. It's just, it's too far of a leap. But I guess it doesn't sort of happen like that, does it? You just take one step at a time.
There's a quote that I love, and I'm just going to paraphrase it, but, it's along the lines of, every overnight success has been 20 years in the making. Often what you see is the very, very tip of the iceberg, of an operation that has been running for decades and has been through, insurmountable challenges and struggles over the years. And by the time you hear about them, that there's been so much history there. There's been so much, from the very first inception to the point where you hear about a company, that it's difficult to comprehend. But you kind of go, oh, this is the first time I've heard of them. So they must have just popped up, and they must have started, 2 weeks ago and just got lucky, or, however you want to kind of frame it. And it's this overnight success story. But, if you look at pretty much any company that's achieved real success in any field, there's always mountains upon mountains of a journey that, the people behind the company went through to get to that point.
Yeah, and that's where I think that's what a very, very valuable lesson for anyone approaching this, because I think there is that instant gratification angle to this, where they see these rather large, like when you visit your headquarters, for example, that's an impressive building, and they see this and they go, oh, and again, if they've only stumbled across you in recent, if they're a new consumer, they're coming across your business or our business or Stu's business, and they're going, oh, this was, oh, cool, you're just here now, and you're right that they didn't see, 5 selling subs in the gym, or, and all of us, we're all, 5-10 years in the game. And it's, it literally is. It's usually, it seems to be a good decade of legwork to get you to anywhere where you're even starting to be known on a bigger scale. But I think coming alongside getting the exposure. So where did we step up from going from there? What was the jump that put you into? I mean, when was the point where you went, I'm going to, was the stores first? Was it the content production which launched it? Was the massivejoes.com first, and then the brick and mortar came after? How did all that become the empire that it is now? What was the link?
Yeah, so it's a kind of an interesting timeline because, as I mentioned, when I first started the company, just selling supplements, to guys at the university gym. And, the next step for that, Stu, you kind of, you alluded to it, but literally I was driving around in my car with Supps in the boot, going to Adelaide Uni Gym, Uni South Australia, Flinders Uni, like literally all of the university gyms around Adelaide, selling supplements out the back of the
Uni gym man.
Yeah,
yeah.
Target the uni students.
100%. And so I guess the next step from there, keep in mind that at that time I was first year university, and I ended up spending 7.5 years at university. So that was, and it was important for me to finish what I started there with my education, with my studies.
What's your degree there, Joe?
So I have two. I have a first class honors degree in mechanical engineering and a first class honors degree in law.
Right.
Wow. So, and that's something that a lot of people wouldn't know as well. I think that you can look at a bodybuilder sometimes and go, oh, here's a big meathead that's probably got no brain in his skull. But something I've always said is there's no such thing as a dumb bodybuilder. Like, in order to be able to do this, you have to have some sort of understanding of biochemistry. You have to sort of know how your body works, why it's responding the way it is. So, I think that probably a lot of people would overlook the intelligence that it takes to do some of the things that you've done, but definitely not a stupid guy, right?
Yeah. Well, the amount of time I spent at university to get degrees that I don't use, you could probably make an argument. I'm probably not the smartest guy either. You know what I'm saying?
I can understand that. I've got a geology degree, for example. That's super relevant right now.
I know, right?
Oh God,
Anyway.
But by all accounts, they're all part of that journey we spoke on. But
they are.
So that escalated from one to multiple, and we continue to upscale and grow our client base until a point where you obviously have a demand, or probably just run out of kilometers on the car, and decide, okay, we need to make this thing online. So is massivejoes.com the next logical step in your evolution?
No. So the actual next step at that point, and this kind of, that was, 6 months from when I first started selling at the gym to driving around to the gyms to going, okay, now there has to be, because the amount that I was selling just to people that were training just at university gyms, I was like, shit, man, there's a market for this. So, this is now 2006. I had no experience in running websites at all. And you got to remember, back then, there weren't things like Magento, Shopify, WooCommerce. Like if you wanted a website, you built it from the ground up. There weren't these kind of plug and play e-commerce platforms. So the first place that I started to endeavor selling things online was eBay. And so this is back when eBay was auction only. There were no fixed price listings. There was no eBay stores. It was literally, you list shit, you put a time limit on it, you set a reserve price, people bid it up, bid it down, whatever, and it sells for what it sells for. And so I was the first person in Australia to sell supplements on eBay. Yeah, wow. And so the people in the industry will appreciate this. I like to give numbers at this point because it's unfathomable. But at the time, I would, import, let's say a tub of NO Explode for, I think landed cost was like 30 or 35 bucks Australian. And I would put it on eBay on auction and just let people bid for it. And I would sell these tubs for between $150 and $200.
What?
Yeah.
What? I remember when I started, NO Explode was the first pre-workout I used to take. There was only one store I could get it in at the time, and it was $119.95. Yep. That's what I paid for it all day long. $119.95.
Yep.
Wow.
Yep.
So it was such a beautiful era then, where there was only it's such a different market now as well. Now there's a huge amount of products on the market. There's, if you just Google pre-workout, you're going to see literally hundreds of different varieties. Back then, there literally was only had in that particular era. There was probably also Super Pump 250, Muscle Farm Assault, Jacked was floating around in that era as well.
Jacked was a little later, yeah.
Yeah, about 2 years apart, maybe a year later. So there was literally only 2 to 4 pre-workouts as a whole that made up that category, as opposed to now where there's 30 to 40, on the Aussie market. So it was there was almost like this nostalgia that I think people in our age group, when we grew up around subs, had, because it was so new. Now subs are such a it was just such a different frontier, I think. It was exciting. It was like, what pre-workouts was such a new concept to us, and there were so few on the market, and you try them, and it was this. People still now nostalgically talk about the pre's of yesteryear, per se. And brands try to emulate that. But
it was a time as well when I think that we were, well, at least myself, was a little bit more naive. Like I was a huge Ronnie Coleman fan, because starting training in the early 2000s, that was who was at the top of the podium at that time. He was number one. And Ronnie Coleman was BSN at the time. And I remember I used to get the Muscular Development magazine, because that's where the majority of my information about bodybuilding came from. Remember 2001, 2002, you didn't have the fitness craze on the internet. Like Facebook was, probably I wasn't on it, put it that way. So the way that I got my information was through magazines. It was Muscular Development was what I read. And I remember this full spread article, Ronnie Coleman standing there with a tub of this red stuff. And it said, once you train with it, you'll never train without it. Mm-hmm. And I was like, yep, I need to get me some of that. And I searched around, and like I said, finally found a store that had it, paid $120, and I just couldn't believe how I felt on this stuff. I think I have this rose-colored glasses memory of it too, but I remember just feeling that this is amazing. I've got this advantage over everyone else. I have something that no one else can get their hands on. And this supplements kind of had this almost aura about them at that time.
100%. Yeah. You're giving me goosebumps, Drew.
He's an amazing orator.
You bring it back.
It does, doesn't it? And I think that's what a lot of brands we sort of maybe could learn a lot, I think, from that sort of that nostalgic sort of vibe that we're getting now from pre-workouts in that era. I think that excitement that people would have around them, and how social media has changed that platform and that landscape, from where now before it was pro bodybuilders were someone you'd only ever see in a magazine cover, and if you traveled for hours once a year, they'd be at an expo. And you'd line up for 2-3 hours to see them. And it was they were gods, amongst it. And now there's a lot of accessibility through social media platforms. You can message these people. You can see what their daily lives look like. They'll reply back to you. You can talk at any time. And it changes. It changed the landscape a lot. And what was some of with the trends moving from that particular era, sort of probably 05 to 07, 08 when you were...
It looks like we've lost... We lost you for a second there, Will. So I think you're cutting in and out a little bit there.
Apologies. We should be okay now.
Yeah,
certainly. So what are some of the trends, I suppose? Because you've been fortunate enough, Joe, to span quite a few years in the game. What's the sort of major trends have you seen towards in the consumer market, and where it's coming into now in particular? Where have you seen it change, and indeed, where do you think it's going to be heading? What are your future picks, I suppose, if you were a betting man?
Get your pen out, Will. He's going to give you all the hot tips. You better get ready, mate.
I've got the notepad going.
If I had a crystal ball. I think that because the industry is so new, we tend to think of it as, perhaps a little linear. Meaning that it kind of has a start point and, it continues down this path, where I think that it's probably a little bit more cyclical in fashion, and similar to fashion, similar to, like a apparel type fashion, where I think that, what I'm kind of seeing at the moment is a movement back to that kind of golden era that Stu was just describing. I think that it'd be very difficult to put an argument against the fact that social media has probably had more of a negative impact on the industry than it has positive. And whether you go, okay, well, maybe that's through too much accessibility, maybe that's through too many people having influence that perhaps hadn't earned that influence or didn't deserve that influence, or, whatever you want to, however you want to kind of frame that. But it effectively diluted a lot of the goodness in the industry, from bodybuilding to supplements to, like, you even look at it from a competitive landscape. Like, Stu, you know, when you first started competing would have been similar to when I first started competing, or at least training to compete. You know, like, you didn't step foot on a bodybuilding stage, you know, until you were ready, until you had developed a physique worthy of stepping foot on a bodybuilding stage. Now, I mean, you look at some of these shows and it's like, man, these people, like, a lot of the athletes haven't even been lifting for 6 months.
Yeah, it's a really, really big point you make there. And like, probably to the detriment of bodybuilding as far as the overall standard goes. Yeah. But I think maybe to the advancement of bodybuilding and the fact that it's brought more interest to the sport and it's broadened the audience, because you've got more people paying fees to enter shows, that sort of thing. But I mean, for me, would I rather go and watch a show with 4 guys on stage who look incredible or 40 guys on stage who look sloppy? I think the answer is pretty straightforward. You know, we want to see the best of the best on the bodybuilding stage. And that's how it was, you know, unless you were basically, what you were trying to do was emulate what you were seeing on the Olympia stage. You could see if you were a long way from that or not. But now guys are like, I got a bicep showing, I'm ready for a comp.
It's and I think it's because patience is shorter. Again, the instant gratification model that socials have promoted, they're not willing to, same as business, you know. They don't want to see that it might take you 5 to 10 years to develop an appreciable physique, particularly in natural federations and so on. You know, it can take you, it does take you years. It takes you literally, you know, years and years. And even the pros that are in the Olympia level, you know, with all the extras involved, we're still talking decades, you know, working on their craft. And I just don't think, you know, unfortunately, particularly the market that might be, you know, sort of be exposed to the fitness market through socials and so on. Yes, they're getting exposure to it, but I don't think they're also the same audience that may have the same value system that allows them to drive 10 years in one particular direction to get there. That would be where I think it might have changed a little bit. And what that's done in the supplement game, interestingly enough, has probably pushed them away, like, more towards the lifestyle than they were before, where it was almost entire. I saw a lot of pre-workouts were specifically for dungeon hardcore bodybuilding. When I think pre-workout from the early 2000s, I think Dorian Yates in Temple Gym. Really hardcore footage, people screaming, people taking double scoops in hoodies and stuff. Like, I don't think of hoodie. Now pre-workouts and so on are almost synonymous with just wearing activewear to stores and things. So it's that's where I've seen changes in from a product perspective. What do you think, Joe? What have you noticed in a product specifically, more so than overall trends? What sort of things have you seen change in the way that brands have presented themselves and what we're marketing these days and that sort of thing versus when you started?
Yeah, there's so many different ways to kind of approach this question. There's so many different, I guess, kind of, nooks of the industry that you could kind of look into. I think that definitely one of the things that and this is what I'm kind of getting at when I say linear versus kind of, circular in its nature. When you go back to, the BSN golden era, the Gaspari Nutrition golden era, USP Labs, BPI, even Muscle Farm, we had in the supplement side of the industry, we had brands, like there were really, world-class brands with world-class branding. They did the right things with their endorsements with athletes, with, BSN with Ronnie Coleman, Gaspari with Rich Gaspari, Flex Lewis, don't forget, was originally with Gaspari coming up. You actually had brands that were being built. And then I think, the industry kind of got to a point where it wasn't so much about the brand. It was about, how can we get an influencer to promote this code and give people X% off and then give them X kickback. And in order for that to make business sense, well, we actually can't invest too much in the brand. As a matter of fact, we can't invest too much in the product because the numbers aren't going to stack. So let's try and make the cheapest possible pre-workout with the cheapest possible brand or, whatever we decide, and just get it out there using social media and influencer networks and whatever it may be. And it kind of eroded that to a point where, you had kind of hero products sitting behind brands that no one even knew what the brand was called, and I'm sure
100%.
Straight off the top of your head, you can think of multiple products that have a product that's made by a brand and no one knows what that brand is. We do because we're in the industry, but most consumers don't. And I think we're starting. Go ahead.
I think that you're 100% right there. And that's a point that I've made on a previous podcast we did, is that, I think that this influx of, brands leaping onto the market has almost made it very hard to sort of determine what's a proper brand and what's something thrown together. It's diluted the whole market, and the consumer doesn't know. It's gotten to a point where the consumer can't see the difference between something that's been thrown together as a promotional tactic, really, rather than something that's designed to help them. And it's sad, really.
But that's interesting though, because I suppose that's probably one thing I see as a very different thing about the Joe's space. Is this change that you've picked up on, this sort of, trend that you spotted there of dilution of branding? Is that where you identified that, took that concept and ran with it? Because you guys are possibly the kings of branding in the industry so far. You've got, like, between the apparel brand, the merch, everything is so branded. The content production, the value put out there, all those sorts of things. Branding is, if most people, you ask them, who does branding well, you guys are probably going to take the cake. So is identifying that in brands and supplement space, is that what put you? Because it must have been a very clear part of your business plan when you started, or at least it must have become apparent, because you guys really have doubled down in that area. So is that something that contributed to it?
I think it's just, a natural inclination of mine. I've always admired, very strong brands. Back from my basketball days, it would be the Jordan brand or the Nike brand, coming into, Apple Computer, for example, Coca-Cola. I've always been very interested personally in what makes a brand. How does a brand emotionally connect with a customer base to make them feel something? How does that come? It's really just been, a personal interest of mine since I was pretty young, to be completely honest, that I've always just been really fascinated with branding. And I think, just to kind of, circle back, because I just want to come back to what we were saying about the progression of the industry as well, is what we're starting to see now, and I'm sure you guys have noticed as well, is coming back around to those very strong brands. There are, there's a couple of brands now that are doing a really good job of it. Off the top of my head, Ghost has done an amazing job with their brand. Redcon One has done an amazing job with their brand. So we're starting to come kind of full circle where, now a lot of these, these kind of market leading companies are finding that right balance between, we can do something in the influencer space. We can do something in, the digital advertising space, but we can also create a brand at the same time and create something really valuable that a customer base or a consumer base can emotionally connect. That builds trust in the brand, it builds loyalty in the brand, and ultimately it builds a really fucking big business.
Yeah, so I think finding that balance is really important. So I think we went far too far towards the side of let's create marketing, and we left the product side behind, and now we're kind of finding our way back to that. But we're still taking the lessons that we learned from the marketing side and from using the influencers and from using the digital marketing. And I think if you can find that balance, that's when you're going to create something that's really industry changing. And I mean, I think I've probably just learned something in the last 10 minutes as well, because with my products, I've always been almost anti-promotion. Like I have my own brand, and it does reasonably well. It does well enough that I can just kind of let it run. I've never put time into marketing the brand, and I've never really invested time into trying to get it stocked. It's just always, I've allowed them to grow organically based on the fact that I believe I'm creating really, really good products. But I think I could probably take a lesson in doing some more work on branding and building that awareness and that sort of thing as well. So I think that balance is important, is really where we've come back to.
But if you just kick it back, Stu, and you go to that story that you told, the nostalgic story of BSN and muscular development and Ronnie Coleman, that is like, that's the holy trinity of branding right there. You've got a very strong brand with, a very poignant kind of icon behind it. Then you've got the influencer, which at the time wasn't an influencer as we know it now, but it was the best bodybuilder in the world, Ronnie Coleman, which kind of sets the the messaging behind the brand. And then you've got the ad platform, which at the time was Muscular Development Magazine, which now is, digital advertising for there's still magazines around, but let's just go full in that direction. And so you've got these three parts of the puzzle that all fit together. So you've got the products, the brand, the good quality products. You've got the person that aligns with the brand that really starts to reinforce that. And then you've got a way of telling people about it through the distribution media. So, I'm so happy you told that story, because it's such a great example of how to really create a super powerful brand and all of the elements that go into it.
Isn't it interesting too, though, that you talk about Ronnie Coleman at that time was a powerful influencer based on the fact that he was successful in his sport. He was well respected. He had a series of training videos that were very exciting at the time, but by today's standards, not very powerful influencer at all. In fact, he doesn't really have almost the personality for being a social media influencer. And there's been this entire shift where it doesn't matter what you've achieved. It doesn't matter if you're a successful bodybuilder. Influencer status is totally different. Like, I remember in 2012, I had Ronnie Coleman at my store in Shell Harbour. And I had a lineup that was between 300 and 400 people long. We did $23,000 worth of sales in my store that day. The news showed up to film the line. And that's kind of the influence that Ronnie Coleman had in that era. Social media wasn't really what it is now. Even in 2012, like, we had social media, we had Facebook and all that by then, but still Ronnie Coleman held a far more powerful impact in the industry than what he would now. You get a pro bodybuilder in your store now. You might get, an extra 30% on your sales for the day, but you're not doing a $24,000 day in store, right? It's so interesting that the whole influencer platform has changed so much, and the people that once could be influencers now, not so much. It doesn't really matter. Even if you have the Mr. Olympia title, it doesn't necessarily mean that you're going to have a great influence on the industry.
I think, interestingly, I'd love to pick your brain on that marketing trinity, because I suppose I like starting this again, like very similar grassroots to myself. I never had an education in how to build businesses, and I think our listeners who a lot of them are very business minded. They're in distribution, they're in wholesale, they're in retail, or there'd be a lot of listeners who I think would love to see themselves in spaces that we occupy in the future. So if you were to go back and tell young Joe how to build a brand per se, or how to build a business, would that where you'd start? Would you start with building the branding per se and working backward? Because without having any formal education on this at all, it was all product, it was all formula, and I didn't even worry about anything else. The packaging, didn't even care. It was just make a formula and just show people, right? And then we've had guests such as like James Bacuzzi on a previous one. He said, build the tub first, build the branding first. He did apparel before he actually had the product made. He did it backwards. He did branding first and then made products to suit that branding. Where do you sit on all of this?
I think there's a little bit of a balance. And I think the reason why there's a balance is because you can have the best brand in the world, but if your products are shit, you're not going to have a very successful business. On the other hand, you can have the best products in the world, but if you don't have a way of advertising them or telling people about them, you're not going to have a business either. So I think that there's probably, a little bit of a pinch of this and a pinch of that kind of go into it. The one thing that I think a lot of, here's the thing as well, Will, is in this industry in particular, we're not protected by any sort of intellectual property when it comes to product formulations, right? You could do it back in the past. You can't do it anymore because you have to declare, especially in this country, you have to declare exactly what's in the product, exactly how much of each ingredient. You can't hide behind prop blends. There was an Australian company that just got dragged over the coals for trying to do it over the last few years. You just can't do it. So by virtue of the fact that there is no intellectual property value in formulating, you can come up with the best formula and someone can rip it off. They can copy it.
And they do, right, Will?
Yeah, they do. And
there's nothing you can do about it. So really, where else do you go? Okay, well, the one thing that can't be copied that you do have intellectual property protection on is your brand. So that's where I would be investing, I guess, more, if we're kind of taking the middle right here and you're saying the formulation is here and the branding is here, I would probably be investing more of my time, effort, and resources on this side towards the branding, because that's where the value is.
We've lost your audio there, Will. You don't have Will's audio anymore there, do you, Joe?
No, I think he's talking, just nothing's coming out of his mouth.
Yeah, we're not getting any audio from you, Will. So get that sorted out while I continue on with Joe.
There we go. That any better?
Yeah, mate. That's better.
We're back. Beautiful. Great. Sorry, guys. So, I believe that's the point of difference, right? The branding is the one thing that can differentiate you from the alternative, because you're right. I guess what the brand values are what the customer resonates with, and you build your long-term customer base off that.
And the other thing as well, Will, is you look at, just take the state of the industry at the moment, right? And what we see through our retail exposure between the three of us, there's certain brands in the industry that, they can pretty much put shit in a tub and it's going to sell.
Yeah.
Because that's the power of that brand. Whereas there's other companies that you look at the formula of a product and you're like, man, this is some good shit. And it's really difficult to sell.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
I think that's something that I've really been encouraged by over the last few years, though, is companies like yourself, Joe, Massive Joe's, looking into things like that, having a look at some of the, say, for example, Australian brands that maybe are emerging and up and coming, and recognizing that, hey, this is a kick-ass product. Yeah. The branding's good. It's being presented right. Let's take it on and let's get it out there. And, I'm seeing that more and more with some of the big companies, is like this focus on, hey, there's some kick-ass brands out there that are up and coming. Let's give them a crack. And I think that's very cool. Is that something that you've really made an effort to focus on, or, is that just something that's sort of happened organically?
Man, it really is part of the fabric of the company, because everyone that's involved in this company is in one way or another bodybuilding themselves, or maybe not to the extent bodybuilding, but participating in resistance-based, bodybuilding-based training for, perhaps it's for CrossFit, perhaps it's for competing, perhaps it's for a particular sport, whatever it is. So, we're kind of selfish in the fact that what we want to use as employees of Massive Joe's, and what my employees want to use, what my staff want to use, is kind of selfish in the fact that we want to be having the best possible products, and what we're putting in our bodies are the best possible products. And we're not really too concerned about, which companies made it or what a particular influencer says about it or whatnot. We're just looking for the best possible products. So I don't think it's been, intentional in that regard, but it's definitely been natural, because it's really part of the fabric of this company.
I think that's become, that became very much apparent. And I believe it's helped a lot of people like myself, where, again, I didn't have that branding and marketing part of the equation, right? But I always believe that the product quality at some point in that equation has to speak enough for itself. And I think that stands the test of time. That's why you guys have been in business for so long. At some point, like you said, a product can get in the hands of someone via lots of exposure on a particular media platform, what have you. You might get that first customer interaction where they've tried the first experience where they try the product, but you can't fake quality, right? You can't fake that formula. At some point, that you will become unstuck by having by skimping on that part of the equation. So I think that's where you build brand longevity, is the quality. The product quality has to be the foundation.
You know what, Will? It's funny. You just made me remember. I was having I had a bunch of my management meetings today with my different higher level staff members here. And so I was sitting in my management meeting with my warehouse manager, and we were discussing some products that we were a little bit overstocked on that we need to kind of move. And I'm not going to mention brands and whatnot, but there's a particular brand that we work with that, from a branding perspective, is, especially in the US, is a very, very strong brand. They've just done everything right from a branding perspective. And they have in terms of the supplements that we carry here in Australia from that brand, they have quite a range. They have really, cream of the crop for particular categories supplements. And then they have really basic, probably shouldn't have put that in the product range supplements. Yeah. And the variance in, longitudinally in sales of those two products is absolutely miles apart. So, there's definitely something to be said about it's not 100% brand, because if you have a very strong brand and you still kind of make pretty ordinary or pretty shitty products, it's not going to work. If you have a very strong brand and you combine that with world-class products, that's really where you're going to be hitting home runs.
Yeah, that's something that I've noticed hugely in the retail space as well. Like, I've been involved in retail for a long time, as you guys know. Yeah. And something I've always said is we can sell anything once. We can sell anything the first time. Any product that comes onto the market, we can sell it to the customer the first time, but are they going to come back and buy it again? Yeah. That's dependent on, does the product work? So branding can only get you so far, right? Branding, advertising, marketing, it can get the product in your hand first time, no problems. Do not have an issue with that. I can move my first batch that you send me. But if your product doesn't back it up, I can't sell it again. And that's when we end up with this issue where we get stuck with products.
It is, but what interests me always, and I lose sleep over this sort of thought, is what defines, how does one build brand? And this came about when I actually, from my time in retail, where I sort of looked at it, and you'd have certain people would come in, customers would come in with a preconceived notion about what a product represents. And I thought from that point on, I went, I always tried to reverse engineer, how did that company translate those values to that customer? What was it that did that? How does that person pick up a tub from a different brand and go, this speaks XYZ values to me, or XYZ message comes to me from this? And you guys have got, you guys do, you have the Massive Joe's podcast, you have raw reviews, you have YouTube channels, you have so much media and so many ways of touching your audience. So I would love to pick your brain when you're trying to communicate something to your given platform and so on. How does that originate? How do you, do you have a very strong message? And this is really valuable for anyone listening that's looking to start their own business, who's currently in business and wants to learn how to develop that angle of their side, develop the marketing angle of their business and getting their message out there. Do you recommend starting with, say, a given, promoting your ethos have an ethos and work backwards to promoting that, or do you arrive more organically and go, okay, this is what we're about, this is how we do it, and just your content's very much organic, and a lot from what I see on your socials. This is what we do here at the HQ. We're packing orders, we're signing tubs. Where do you stand on this? Because listeners would get such great value on learning how to physically build a brand, what it looks like, what's the day-to-days of that.
Yeah, I think that you definitely you start with why. You start with, the company mission, the company philosophy, like why are you doing this? What is your purpose? Why, start with why. Simon Sinek said it best. Start with why. What is the why? You need to be able to very clearly define that. Every person that works in this company can tell you straight away why we do what we do at Massive Joe's, because it's the first thing that they get told, right? We are delivering the products and information to help people improve their lives through health and fitness. That's it. Very succinct, very to the point. So then you start dissecting that and you go, okay, well, how do we actually do this? And because of that company philosophy, a lot of what we do is about adding value to people in the health and fitness community that's going to help them improve their lives without asking for anything in return. So I think that, when it comes to building brand, effectively what you're doing is you're building trust and you're building loyalty. How do you build trust and you build loyalty? You add as much value as you possibly can to your target customer base, or people who you think would be in your target customer base, without expecting anything in return. I think that where a lot of people go wrong, a lot of people kind of get that. They understand, okay, I need to build trust. I need to build loyalty. It's like taking a girl out on a first date. You're not going to sleep with her on the first date most of the time. Stu's like, you got to wine and dine a little bit. The same things with customers. You have to build that trust. You have to build that loyalty. You can't expect to come across a customer in the first instance and expect them to throw down $100, $200 and, support whatever cause your business is trying to get out of the relationship. It doesn't work like that. You have to foster the relationship. You have to build the trust. You have to build the loyalty. And I think where a lot of people fall down is they're happy to give the value, but they expect something in return straight away. Relationships don't work like that. Human relationships don't work like that. Customer relationships don't. It's not a natural expectation. You need to give as much value as you can without expecting anything in return, and just have faith that at some point along the line, it's going to come back. It always does, but it might not be.
Could you give us like an example? Like I'm trying to kind of piece this together and kind of get what you're meaning as far as delivering value without expecting something in return. Would that be, say, for example, and giving out an exercise program for free without charging people to pay, without charging people for it? Or, is that the kind of thing you're getting at?
100%. So if you look at like a bunch of the stuff that we do in the Massive Joe's business in particular, all of the content that we do, whether it's the YouTube videos, whether it's the podcast, whether it's the written articles, whether it's the Supplement Simplified articles, all of that is 100% free content. It's distributed 100% for free. We never ask for anything in return. It's just like, here you go. You mentioned at the start of the podcast, Will. Here's a raw review. Here's everything you need to know about this supplement. Done. There it is. Yep. We're not expecting anything in return.
And it does come back in full. That's where I started, was between your guys' raw reviews and watching the Gorilla Chemist videos in that particular era. That's what got me into supplements, and then formulating, and then here we are now. And so it's quite interesting where you don't know what you plant the seed, you don't know where it's going to go. But eventually it'll plant the seed now so you can sit in the shade in 10 years.
I'm really interested to hear what this is something we've been doing with a few of our guests that we've had on, Joe, is we ask them what their top 4 favorite supplements are right now. As of this point, what are your favorite supplements? It can be any supplements, any brand, whatever it is. What are you using right now? What are your favorites? What's exciting you at the moment?
Okay. So I'll go with products that I'm actually using right now, and the first 4 that come to mind. So the first one is Miracle Labs Patriots Whey, which is a whey protein concentrate with little bits of cereal pieces in it. And it's just amazing. It's like heaven. The second one is Core Hard Extreme, which is an estrogen and cortisol modulating supplement, which is something that I've been using. It's actually a supplement that we formulated in partnership with Core Nutritionals in the US, which is one of the brands that we distribute exclusively. And it's, I've been using it since we formulated it, which is almost 5 years now. Just an amazing, just overall hormone regulating supplement. Then I'll probably go to, let me throw a pre-workout in there. Arms Race Nutrition Harness is probably my, complete stimulant-based pre-workout of choice. And then I got to throw Axe and Sledge Hydraulic in there as well, which is a stim-free pre-workout.
Yeah, geez. That's an interesting product, Core Hard. That was one of the first guys that used 600 milligrams of KSM, 66, phosphatidylserine, white button mushroom, I think it is. That's a very interesting supplement. And it was, again, something that was, unless when you did the reading, you thought, hey, this has got some legs, this has got potential. But if you didn't take the time to do the deep dive, the product would because I see that you'll see it in stores, and the ones who sell it well will generally sell my products well too. I find people who sell that formula well and they know how to explain that to customers, they're the educated retailer you want to work with. And I think it says a lot which horses you back in particular. But there's a product that it was looking at. I would say that's probably more of an adrenal support product almost, working backwards over the last few years, and that was years before its time, realistically.
Hugely. I remember when we formulated it and going to Doug Miller, who is the owner of Core Nutritionals. And I remember the conversation. He was like, are you sure that you're going to sell this product?
Isn't it funny how there has been this huge change in it? Like, I know the guests that we've had on so far, there seems to be some, I guess, recurring themes with our favorite supplements. And one of them is something in the hormonal space.
Yeah.
And this is something that we didn't see. Well, I didn't see anyway. Like I've been like from sort of 2009 to say 2015, I never really sold adrenal products. I didn't sell many anti-estrogens.
Yeah.
Test boosters were probably the only thing that people were interested in the hormonal space. But really this kind of adrenal support space, this anti-estrogen space has become huge. Yeah. And another thing I've noticed is the guys who have been around this for a while have this tendency to move towards non-stim pre-workouts. And that's something that me and Will both are huge advocates for is non-stim. Like I try and steer clear of the stimulants as much as I can now. Whereas in my early 20s, it was like, give me the hardest stuff you can. I want to feel like I've been smacked in the face with a shovel.
It was the era of the stim, wasn't it? Our early 20s. Yeah. But I think that you're dead right, Stu. That's a trend that's emerged. The adrenal space. Even we had with the gorilla last week. We had the week before on episode 9, we had he worked on a product called Quarter Block as one of his first products ever built in that brand Chemix. You know, it's like after a pre and an intra, it was an adrenal product. And that's what he markets in the fat loss space, which I think that's brilliant to see. It's a really outside the box wave. But it would have been seen outside the box until recently. We're very fortunate. We've got a very educated customer base who are very,
or more educated than before.
Yeah.
Let's not go too far.
We're blessed. We're blessed to be able to at least work in this space now. And I've certainly seen it as I've aged and gone looked more into health and longevity and over our optimization more so than looking at just performance in the gym. I think so too as what I tend to formulate and look at the adrenal, like stress management, and that space is massive. Any of those trends, things that you've seen reflected in your online and retail space, is that become a big area for you guys?
Yeah, I'd be interested to know why you've gone down that non-stim pathway as well.
Personally?
Yeah.
I think I have a very specific reason why I did it and a very specific story behind it. So what I found was towards the end of it was about 12 months ago, actually. It was about this time last year. I found myself in a cycle where, I was training training late at night. So usually I'll finish up here at Massive Joe's headquarters, 7:30, 8 o'clock most nights. So by the time, I have my pre-workout meal, I get to the gym, I wasn't training until, 8:30, 9 o'clock. Some nights it was even 10 o'clock. And I was that tired by that time of day that I was having a pretty potent stimulant-based pre-workout just to get me through that workout. So then I take that, let's say it's 8:30 at night. And then, because there's so many stimulants in it, I couldn't get to sleep. So, I'm sleeping shit. I'm, getting up. Back then I was getting up at 6:30 in the morning. I wouldn't sleep well. So I'd wake up tired. So I'd get a fat burner in or a really strong coffee or whatever it is, get those caffeine levels up again. And it was just this kind of self-perpetuating cycle of too much caffeine late at night. So I wasn't sleeping well, I wasn't resting well. So then I needed more caffeine the next day. And then I needed more caffeine at lunchtime and then more caffeine before my workout at night. And it was just getting out of control where, I was, easily over a gram of caffeine a day and just feeling like normal, just to feel normal. So at that point, I'm like, nah, this is not good. I got to flip this shit around. So I did a couple of things. The first thing I did was I stopped training late at night and now I train first thing in the morning. So, now I'll get up 4:30. I'm at the gym by 5:30. I get my workout in, before I get to the office. So I know that I'm not kind of, getting caught up at the office and training late and having to use a high stim pre-workout to get me through that late workout because it's been such a long day before I even get to the gym. So I did that. And then I was like, okay, let's start to look at this caffeine intake and let's try to get this down because it's really affecting my ability to get proper rest. I need to get back to sleeping properly, to getting good REM sleep, to actually, if I'm trying to get to the next level, with my physique, with my business, with me personally, I need to start taking, the rest and recovery a little bit more seriously than I have. So that's when I started going, okay, let's start to bring the caffeine levels down. Do I need to be having 300 milligrams of caffeine in a pre-workout before every workout? Well, no, I don't. I might go to half a scoop. Let's get that down to 150. All right, let's get that completely out. Let's look at non-stim pre-workouts now because I just really don't need it. So I think for me, that was kind of the catalyst from getting away from a lot of these, high stim pre-workouts, high caffeine loaded supplements, because I just got to a point where it was so bad, I needed to do something about it.
And you get to that point where, and I think the guy in some of the paintings behind you sort of coined the term sleep faster, and Gary Vee loves the whole 4 hours sleep a night, isn't it? And it's just bloody awesome. And a lot of people have built that around, especially people who are going to business. They're very much very A-type personalities, very dominant, very driven, very ambitious people, and they tend to see, if I can sleep less and work more, that's great, I'm going to hit my goals sooner. And it's become popular now, and it's almost synonymous where if you have a startup or if you have if you're functioning in business, you have to not sleep, you have to work. It's trendy to sleep less to show how little you actually sleep to it. But if you look at the physiology, it's just retarded for all things cognition, for all things physiology, for all things hormonal, and you get to, there's a ceiling to that lifestyle limit. So I appreciate more than anyone work ethic, but I also appreciate more than anyone physiology. And I think that's not exactly the most conducive way long term. It catches up with you very quickly.
I'm a huge fan of sleep as well, as I think every human probably should be. But I'm with Joe as well, where I like to rise early. So for me, the way that I've found I operate best is when I get up really early, I kind of feel like I've got this head start on the world. Yeah. It's like when I'm up at, I've got a 2-year-old too, so I'm up at like 5 a.m. anyway. But when I start being active at that time and getting stuff done, it's like I'm already 2-3 hours ahead of everyone else in the world. Yeah. And I go to bed early. My little fella's in bed by 7:30. I'm in bed by about 8:30. So I'm getting plenty of sleep, even though I'm getting up super early. But it's like those hours after 7:30, 8 o'clock, you're not productive at that time anyway. So I may as well be sleeping then. And my productive hours, I try and punish as much stuff as I can before the rest of the world's awake. And I feel like I've got this huge leap ahead of everyone else. Is that kind of where you sit on it, Joe?
Yeah, I think, back to kind of what Will was saying about sleep, I think that there definitely is an argument to be made about, total amount of sleep versus quality sleep as well. For me, most nights, 6 to 6.5 hours total sleep is what I get. But I'm not really focused on that. I'm focused on, how much deep sleep am I getting? Am I getting 90 minutes to 120 minutes of deep sleep? And you can feel the difference, I'm super big with data. So I track my sleep with my watch and apps and all sorts of shit. Just to make sure that I'm, like Arnold said, sleeping faster or sleeping as efficiently as possible, which kind of ties back to, okay, well, when are you having your last dose of caffeine for the day? If you're trying to get to bed by 9:30, 10 o'clock, well, you need to kind of trim that shit back at about 5 in the PM, or else you're not going to be sleeping efficiently. So, I think there's probably an argument to be made there, but more to your point as well, Stu, 100%, man. Like, one of my sayings that one of my quotes is make the most of your 24. We all have the same 24 hours in a day. How you choose to spend it, whether you wake early, whether you wake a bit later and go to sleep late at night, it's all a sliding scale, but you need to be as efficient as you can be in those hours that you do have. So to your point, if you're saying, well, I know that after 7:30 at night, I'm not particularly effective. Well, that's when you get your sleep in and then get up early. And as soon as you get up out of bed, you're ready to go and you're making the most of your 24. So I think everyone's slightly different. I do tend to agree with you that, I enjoy getting up early because it does kind of give me that sense of having a little bit of a head start on the world. But I think each to their own in that respect. Yeah.
And I think that's Eric Thomas, ET. He was quite big on that as well, making the most. Everyone's got the same 24 hours. And it's an interesting concept how much and it's always amazing when you do have those days or weeks where you really test the limits of what you can do in a day, you do realize it's quite impressive what you can actually fit into those 24 if you have a dig. But I do, in terms of the sleep tracking side of things, so we won't keep you for too much longer, Joe, but with in terms of the sleep tracking apps and stuff, have you been playing with Aura Rings, or are we talking like any particular sleep tracking things that you, because our listeners are people who are interested in optimizing, you know, so what's your go-tos for getting your data?
So I got my Apple Watch. So I use my Apple Watch, and I use an app called Auto Sleep. And I sleep with my Apple Watch on, and that effectively tracks, you know, when I fall asleep, how long I sleep for, what state of sleep I'm in, how much REM sleep I'm getting, everything, you know. So it's good.
That, and making impacts on that space is quite a fascinating one. Like you said, when you look at the actual amounts of REM sleep in there, and around at that 120-minute mark, you know, it's sort of where you're starting to feel fantastic. That's really optimal. When I started getting people and I was beta testing some adrenal stuff and watching people's sleep like tracking data, you're right. The total versus the actual quality, it is imperative, because you see when you get people who are typically highly stressed, and people have got very busy lifestyles now. They've got a lot on their plate. People are working longer hours. They're not switching off. They've got this cumulative. They're using more and more caffeine because of the cycle you described before. You know, the adrenal burden just continues and continues, and they get to 9 p.m. when we would optimally like to sleep, so we can get up at 5 a.m. to crush life. And unfortunately, they don't switch off. They're in bed physically for their 8 hours. But I had one particular PT who was getting, this was a guy who was absolutely inside out peeled. He was incredibly focused on body composition, tracked his HRV, was really about this lifestyle, and still was getting sub 30 minutes of REM sleep, which it would make you feel rubbish after any more than a few days of that to most people. But and it was just because he pushed himself very hard, and he liked to track, but again, it wasn't quite optimizing in some of those spaces. So I think it's really valuable when you said shift up your day to be your most productive. Don't just do it for the sake of doing it. Don't work 20 hours for the sake of working 20 hours. You know, and optimize it. Train in the morning. If you don't train in the evenings, that really interferes with a lot of people's sleep quality. Evening training, non-stim or otherwise, it helps our body deal with stress, but it's a massive spiker in cortisol. Shift it. You want to spike in the morning. Happy days. You know, move that on, and then start looking at, again, the caffeine use. There's practical ways, and hopefully our listeners get some value out of that. You can rejuggle your days, and you can make quite profound impacts on the downstream effects. You know, like from PM to AM training, straight away you're going to really smooth out that PM cortisol spike, which is going to improve that deep REM sleep. That'll optimize testosterone massively. That'll massively improve your cognition, your dopamine, everything for that next day onwards, how your body metabolizes carbs, even right through everything. That'll flow onto all areas, which allows you to do it better. So I think that's a really valuable take-home message that we all sort of arrived at there. All three of us sort of saying, optimize your 24
sleep.
To fit your schedule.
To simplify it, sleep is important.
Well articulated.
Just to shift gears a little bit, just to finish up the episode, Joe, you know, you've done so many things from your business to your bodybuilding to your supplements. Can you give us something to take home for the young guys who really look up to you as something to aspire to? What's some advice you can throw out there right now? If there's one piece of advice you could give to young guys who are looking to make something of themselves, what would the biggest piece of advice you could give be?
I would, you know, I think that a lot of people misinterpret the relationship between speed and patience. You know, especially when you're younger. And I know I certainly did when I was younger. And, you know, as I'm kind of getting older, it's something that I'm appreciating a little bit more and more. And what I mean by that is anything that you're trying to achieve that's really worthwhile, you need to exert patience as if you're running an ultra marathon. And you need to understand that it's going to take a lot of time. So, you know, if you're listening at the moment and you want to become an IFBB pro at some point, you got to understand that, you know, that's a 10 plus year goal. That's not going to be something that happens in a couple of years. As much as you really want it to happen really quick, it's a long goal. If you're listening and you're just starting out in a business and you want to build an 8-figure, 9-figure business, it's not going to happen in 5 years. It's probably not going to happen in 10 years. You're talking about a 20-year goal. So I think exerting patience, and much more patience than you perhaps initially expect on the macro, on the long term, when it comes to achieving any goal of significance, is really important. But that also needs to be balanced with speed in the short term, or what I say, speed in the micro, meaning that you need to make the most of your 24. You need to be making the most of every opportunity. You need to be moving every single day as if you're going to achieve that marathon goal in that day, in that 24-hour period. So I think, a lot of people perhaps achieve the speed. They move very quickly. They do a lot. They're making the most of the 24, but they just don't do it long enough to actually get the end result that they're seeking. They give up and they change direction and they do other shit because it's taking too long. On the flip side, I think, people that have patience, which is much more rare, but have patience and understand that things are going to take a lot longer than, perhaps they initially expect, don't move fast enough every single day to actually ever get there. So I think it's, understanding that relationship and having that marathon mindset when it comes to achieving any goal that's significant, that's worthwhile, but at the same time, working your fucking ass off every single day to make sure that you're making progress towards that goal every 24-hour period you get.
Awesome. Yeah, I think that's probably a really good note to end on. And I think the listeners are definitely going to get a lot out of what we've chatted about today. It's, having a guest like you on is absolutely awesome for us. So really appreciate your time coming on today, Joe.
No, thank you guys, man. It's been, I can't believe we've been at it for over an hour already. It feels like we just started talking. So it's always a good time of a good conversation.
It is just warming up, but I figure we can always, by all means, we'd love to have you on for a part 2 later on. We got this with the griller as well. We had so much to cover and so much value to put out that we didn't thought, we thought we'd get him back again. So we'd love to have you again on the future, Joe. But in the short term, mate, we'll play the patience card. So with that, thank you very much for that take home message. Thank you, Stu, again, and that's that'll be a wrap for episode 11 of the Wot Supp podcast. Thanks for listening, guys.
Ciao.